All right, so like I said, we are continuing on with the with our live cooking series, where each week I am highlighting a different seasonal ingredient and hopefully showing you a new, fun, interesting way to use it. So for this week's recipe, we are highlighting peaches. Peaches are in season for summer, along with most stone fruits. So that's any fruit that has this kind of pit like a peach. So plums, apricots, cherries, they're all in the same kind of family, and they're all in season now. So for this recipe, we're making a peach salsa. So this is definitely using peaches in probably a different way than you normally use them. You probably use them more so in sweet things, more dessert kind of meals. But here we're actually going to mix them up with our typical kind of Mexican flavors that you would use for salsa, or a regular salsa or guacamole. We have jalapeno, lime, cilantro, all that good stuff that actually goes really well with the sweetness of the peaches. And then we are serving that over a Cajun spiced salmon. So we're using all these different spices. I have them all lined up here. We have smoked paprika, garlic powder, oregano and thyme, and some salt and pepper. And then I'm using cayenne pepper, which is going to be pretty spicy. So an alternative to cayenne pepper, if you don't want too much spice, would be to use chili powder. Chili powder will give it more of like a taco kind of flavor, versus the cayenne pepper that's giving us more of that like Cajun blackened spiciness kind of flavor. So you can switch those out. You'll just get a little bit of a different taste. So this recipe for the peach salsa we're serving it over salmon, but you certainly don't have to. You can eat it just as is with your favorite, tortilla chips or other, favorite dipper. You can serve it at a summer barbecue like July 4th coming up this weekend. You could also serve it over a different protein like chicken instead of salmon if you don't eat salmon, or another different kind of fish, really whatever you want. Okay, so we're gonna get started with the salmon first, because obviously that's gonna be cooked in the oven. You could also grill this salmon. I don't have a barbecue, so I'm not grilling it, but it would be really delicious on the barbecue. You could also cook it on the stovetop, so you could sear it in a pan if you wanted to as well. This to me is like the cleanest, easiest way to just put it on a baking sheet and put it in the oven. So we're using the recipe as written, serves 4. So here I just have 2 pieces of salmon. I'm actually using frozen salmon, so you could totally use frozen salmon. You don't have to get fresh. It usually is cheaper to buy it frozen. This is wild salmon. I do recommend looking for wild salmon if you can, just better quality usually. But so the frozen salmon, I just took it out of the freezer last night to let it thaw in the fridge, and it'll be good to go. So we're going to make our spice blend first, and then we'll coat the salmon and get that in the oven. So first things first is preheating the oven to 425. Let that go. And paper towel. So you're always going to want to pat the salmon dry. Usually with any fish really, or even like chicken breasts, you usually want to pat them dry, because there will be a lot of water content there. Especially these that are coming out of the freezer, there's even more water content. So you want to pat these dry. And so this recipe will be a lot different from the first few that we did that are much more like Mediterranean flavors. Here we're using, as our fresh herb in this recipe, we're using cilantro. And we're using, of course, these really deep, Cajun kind of spices that are going to give us a whole different kind of flavor. So I wanted to switch it up a little bit this week. Okay. And if you have whatever kind of salmon fillets you're using, sometimes, there could be little, those little tiny bones. You could just pull those out with your hands. So I always just like to do a little look through to make sure there's nothing there. All right, usually if you're getting it, already butchered, that stuff will be taken out for you, and you can ask for it that way if you're getting it fresh. But sometimes they sneak in there anyway. So we are using, and this, the way the recipe is written, you might end up with more spice blend than you need for, you know, however much salmon you're using, but it's just spices, so they'll last. Just keep them, you know, in a container like this that's sealed, and the spice blend will last, and you can use it for something else, maybe tacos. Okay, so we are using 2 teaspoons, my teaspoon doesn't fit in here, 2 teaspoons of smoked paprika. Whoops. You can use regular paprika if you want. The smoked just gives it a smoky flavor. So it gives it more of like a barbecue kind of flavor. Okay. I just use a paper towel to clean out my teaspoon since I have to keep using it. Okay, so 2 teaspoons of smoked paprika, 2 teaspoons of garlic powder, and my 1/4 teaspoon of the cayenne pepper. So like I said, the cayenne is pretty hot, so we're only using a 1/4 teaspoon of this. If you were subbing in chili powder instead of the cayenne pepper, you could use a little bit more of the chili powder because it's more mild. Our cayenne pepper, and 1 teaspoon each of dried oregano and dried thyme. Okay. And then, of course, some pepper. Just gonna do, you want like a 1/4 teaspoon-ish of black pepper. If you've been watching these, you know I don't measure the black pepper because I crack it fresh. So just a few grinds of the black pepper. And we want 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Okay. So that's it for our spice blend. We're just mixing this up with my hand. And like I said, you could use this, you could use the same spice blend. It would be delicious on chicken. It's just a good dry rub. It would be good on meat, like really anything, any kind of protein, shrimp. Since this is a dry rub, we want it to really adhere to the salmon and really stick on when it cooks. So we're going to drizzle about 1/2 teaspoon or so of olive oil just over the tops of the salmon so that the spice mixture will stick, right? So I'm gonna just give this one more pat. It's like I said, when it comes from frozen, it has a lot more water. Okay. All right. If anybody's popping in while we're cooking up, make sure you say hi. All right, so I'm just giving a little drizzle of olive oil. Rub that on there. And we're only putting the spices on the flesh side, not on the skin side. Okay, and then I'm putting the salmon on a parchment-lined baking sheet. And I'll just get rid of this and rinse my hands. Whoops. So we have the salmon now on a parchment-lined baking sheet. And we can use, I'll just use a little spoon to do this. You want to really try to pat the spice mixture onto the salmon so that it'll really stick. So just enough to coat the whole top. You don't need to put too much. You don't want there to be like a thick layer of it, just enough that it's coated. Okay. And see how I'm kind of like patting it, and so the extra, you know, any excess is kind of just falling off to the sides. So we get just enough, like I said, you don't want like a fat layer of the spices on there. Now salmon, you probably know, is very high in omega-3 fatty acids, which is something that many adults don't get enough of, and it's super good for our brain health. So getting a serving of fatty fish like salmon that is high in these omega-3 fatty acids, having like at least one serving of something like salmon a week is really good to get that dose of omega-3s. You can also get omega-3s from things like flax seeds, chia seeds. Okay. All right, so that's it. So it's just a light coating of the spice mixture. So the salmon will cook. It's where the oven's at 425. It'll cook for somewhere around like 10 to 12 minutes, but it really depends on the thickness of your salmon fillets. So if they're thin, they're gonna be on, like, it might even be like 8 to 10 minutes versus 10 to 12, or if they're really thick or it's a big piece, it might be closer to like 12 to 15 minutes. So you wanna be careful not to overcook salmon, because if it gets overcooked, it gets really tough and it's not so good. So you just want it to be right at the point that it's flaking with a fork. You shouldn't have to like cut into a piece of salmon. You want it to just be able to flake with a fork. And it's always better to pull it out a little under, and it'll continue to cook through as it sits out of the oven. So I'm using yellow peaches where the flesh on the inside is yellow. There are also white peaches available. So the yellow peaches are going to be a little bit more tart, whereas the white peaches are going to be a little bit sweeter. So the yellow peaches actually work well for this, because that way the sweetness doesn't totally, overbear the other flavors. So the tartness of the yellow peaches goes well with like these other savory flavors that we're using. Okay, so I'm going to go down to the cutting board here so you can see. So we want to cut, obviously peaches have a giant pit in the center of them, so we want to try to kind of cut around that. And we are keeping the skin on here. It just will help to, can't even get around the pit here. It'll help to keep the peach together so the peaches don't like disintegrate in the salsa. Okay, so you can see I'm just kind of cutting around that pit as much as I can get off, so that's good. Cooking with a garbage bowl beside you is very useful, so you don't have to keep going back and forth to your garbage. Toss it in the bowl. Okay, so set that aside, cut up the other peach. And with peaches, you don't want, especially for something like this, like I said, similarly to wanting to keep the skin on, you don't want the peaches to fall apart in the salsa. So you want to look for ones that are ripe, right? They're a little bit soft to the touch, but you don't want ones that are like overly ripe where like you bite into it and the juice comes pouring out. You want it to be a little bit firm so that the peaches really hold together. Okay, so now we're going to chop up these wedges into smaller pieces. So just work with each piece. This does not have to be perfect in any way. We just want to dice it up. Right, so we just want nice pieces like this. Nice cubes. Okay. And peaches. Peaches are our seasonal ingredient for this recipe. So peaches are, as with most fruits, high in antioxidants, good for your heart health. They have fiber, they're good for your digestive health. We want 2 cups of peaches, which is just about 2 peaches, like the size of the ones that I'm using. peaches all diced up. So this should be like just about 2 cups here. I actually did this a little bit backwards. I recommend starting with the onion, the red onion, the scallion, and the jalapeno. So I say that because we're going to let those sit with the lime juice until we're ready to fully assemble it, and that will help mellow out the flavor a little bit of the onion and the jalapeno. So you're not just like biting on raw onion, or you're not just biting on a piece of raw jalapeno that might be really spicy. Similarly to the recipe we did last week, where with the shallots mixed in with the tomatoes, we let the shallots sit in that balsamic vinegar and olive oil before adding in the tomatoes. So that was the same idea, that it kind of mellowed out that flavor a little bit. So let's do our onion. So starting with a whole onion, we're going to cut it in half down from the top. This onion is not really stable. Thanks. Oh my goodness. Okay. And we're only going to use half of this onion. We only need 1/4 cup of onion finely chopped. Right. And then we're going to cut off that little end there. And so we keep the root intact so the onion stays together. Keep your palm on top of the onion, and I'm going to slide your knife through just before getting to the root, so not all the way to the end. And the closer together you make these slices, the smaller the pieces of onion will be. So obviously you want to be very careful doing this, but the closer, the smaller you can get the pieces right off the bat, then you don't have to do as much chopping after. And then we turn the onion and we cut from the root to the end. Again, the closer these are cut, the smaller the pieces will be. Turn the onion again, and then cut straight across. Okay, that should be plenty. So you can see really how small these pieces are when the closer you're able to cut without cutting your hand. Okay, so we want 1/4 cup of this finely diced red onion. Yeah, so it's really like a half of a half. It's like 1/4 of the onion. And add that into a bowl. Clear this onion. Okay, then we want 1 scallion. Cut off the end there. We're going to just add the white part of the scallion, thinly sliced, in with the salsa, and then we're going to reserve the green parts to use as garnish. Oops. Smell the salmon. Okay. So the white parts going right in with the red onion. Okay, and then the jalapeno. We're only using half the jalapeno. All of the heat, all of the spice in the jalapeno is the inside with the seeds and the rib. So we'll cut off the end here. If you can wear gloves when you're cutting a jalapeno so you don't forget that you've touched a jalapeno and then you go and touch your eye or your mouth. Not good. Okay, so we'll want to do this over in a little garbage bowl. So all of the heat is in this part here. So carefully want to cut that out. And then you can kind of just go in there with your hands and get everything out of there. Again, if you see me go to touch my face at any point now, yell at me in the comments so I remember. Okay, so we're only using half the jalapeno. All right, so it's all gutted. And now we just want to get it finely chopped, right? We don't want to be munching on giant pieces of jalapeno. So I just cut it in strips, right? Really thin little strips. And then just cut really tiny across. Okay, and that's going in. Okay, so in our big mixing bowl right now we have red onion, the scallion, and the jalapeno. And now we want to add our lime juice. Oh, before doing that, we're also using, and I made a note of this in the recipe because, yeah, I just almost forgot. We want the zest. Oh, salmon's done. We want to use the zest of the lime as well. So you always want to make sure that you zest before you cut. Let me just pull the salmon out because the timer just went off. Okay. Yeah, so this guy's done. The white stuff that comes out of salmon is normal. You can eat it. So don't ever fear that that's there. It's just protein. It's albumin that comes out. But so you can tell by kind of touching it on the side that it's pretty firm. And I can just tell by the color too that it's no longer raw, right? It looks cooked. So that's done. And like I said, that like the thickest part in the middle, it'll continue to carry over cooking a little bit as it sits. So we don't want to overcook it. So take it out now. Let that sit. The lime. So we are using the zest. Okay, so whenever a recipe says that you're using the zest and the juice of a lemon, a lime, whatever, always zest it when it's whole before you cut it in half because it's much harder to zest halves of limes than it is to zest a whole lime. Okay, so there's a couple different tools you can use to zest. You might have an actual like zesting tool, or you can use a grater like this, or a microplane. Microplane is my tool of choice. But the zest we're actually going to serve as a garnish. So we're going to zest the lime, show you, into a separate little container here. I initially had the zest in the salsa, and then I decided that the zest as a, like right on top just adds like an extra bright note to that salmon because the salmon has such a, is so heavily spiced. Okay, so you just want to keep turning the lime, get as much of the green off as you can. You don't want to go really any deeper than this. When it starts to get really white, that part's going to be bitter. So you don't want to go much deeper than just that very surface green. Okay. All right, that's plenty. And half of it's not in the bowl. Okay, so there's the zest. Set that aside. And now my trick always, right, for getting more of the juice out is to roll the lime a little bit with a little bit of pressure. Cut that in half. And then we are juicing the whole lime right into this bowl with the onions and the jalapenos. Okay, so if you have some sort of juicing tool, that's helpful. just want to stir that around a little bit. So like I said, this will help we can add our salt in here too. We're going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Having these sit with the lime juice and the salt will just help to, like I said, just help to mellow the flavor a little bit. Okay, so we can finish chopping up. All we have left, because we already did our peaches, we're going to chop up 1 Roma tomato. So the recipe calls for a 1/2 cup of diced Roma tomato, which is just about 1 that's like this size. Okay. And I'm continuing to use the board that I cut the onions and the jalapenos because it's all going in the same bowl. But normally if you were cutting jalapenos, I would clean the board so you don't get jalapeno spice on whatever else you're cutting. Okay, so we'll cut the tomato in half. And then I actually am going to cut, I'm going to actually remove a lot of the seeds from the middle because the seeds just add more moisture to the salsa, which can make everything a little extra liquidy. So if you can remove some of the guts of the tomato, it helps. Okay, and just like the peaches, we just want these nice diced size pieces of tomato, and they don't have to be perfect. So again, we're using more tomato in this recipe. We love tomatoes in summer. And the last thing that we are cutting up is some cilantro. Okay, so just have a bunch of cilantro here. We want a 1/4 cup of chopped cilantro. So just pull a bunch of leaves off. Now cilantro can definitely be a more polarizing flavor. Some people think cilantro tastes like soap, and that's actually a legitimate thing. It means you're a super taster. You have super taste buds that are super sensitive. But if you don't like cilantro, you can always use parsley, which is more mild flavored. But if you want that really like authentic, you know, kind of salsa flavor, that's going to be cilantro that's going to give you that. Okay. That should be good. If you want to know a fun fact, the worst injury I have to date in the kitchen is chopping cilantro. Almost chopped off my entire finger in culinary school, chopping cilantro. So be careful when it gets close to your fingers. Move your fingers. Okay, so we just want a rough chop of that. Okay. All right, so that is it. Here. Okay, so we will assemble the rest of the salsa. This you could, you know, when you're making this on your own, You could definitely do this part, you know, get the onions and the jalapeno and stuff in here with the lime juice ahead of time. If you really want to, you know, cool down the flavor. Of course, if you really can't handle heat, you can leave out the jalapeno. You don't need to have the jalapeno in there. But the jalapeno really doesn't give off that much heat when you remove all the stuff on the inside. Okay, and now we will add our peaches, tomatoes, and cilantro. And give that a stir, and that is it. That's our salsa. Another delicious fruit to do this with, I said I have a blueberry salsa recipe. Mangoes are also really good as a salsa. You've probably seen mango salsa recipes. Okay, so that's it. That's our salsa. We have all of the onions and stuff chopped up nice and fine, so nobody's biting on any big chunks of onion or anything. So that's our salsa. Smells delicious. And let's get a plate and we'll plate up this salmon. Okay. And also, I'll just show you. Once it's baked, if there is skin on your salmon, the skin should just kind of peel off really easily. Okay. If you cook salmon in the skillet, or even on the grill, and you actually cook the skin side, it will get nice and crispy, and then you can eat it. But coming out of the oven like that, it's like soggy and kind of yucky. So I don't like to eat it when it comes out of the oven like that. It's like chewy. If it doesn't get crunchy, it's just chewy. Okay, so we have our salmon here, and we're just going to spoon. Again, this as written is intended to serve 4, so we're just spooning like a half a cup-ish each of the salsa over each salmon fillet. And then we can hit it with our lime zest, just a little sprinkle of that. And let's see, we can put some more cilantro on there. And that's it. I'm gonna try not to spill this one all over my computer. Whoops. Okay, that's it. That's our Cajun spiced salmon with the peach salsa. That's better. All right. So that's it.